number 17. Joshua, the 3rd chapter, verse number 17. Then we'll look at Joshua, the 4th chapter, verse number 9. Joshua, 3rd chapter, again at verse number 17. Yeah, please stand. It says, then the priests who bore the ark of the covenant of the Lord stood firm on dry ground in the midst of the Jordan, and all Israel crossed over on dry ground until all the people had crossed completely over the Jordan. Joshua 4 verse 9 said, then Joshua set up 12 stones in the midst of the Jordan, in the place where the feet of the priests who bore the ark of the covenant stood. They are there to this day. So the priests who bore the ark stood in the midst of the Jordan until everything was finished that the Lord had commanded Joshua to speak to the people, according to all that Moses had commanded Joshua. And the people heard it and crossed over. Then it came to pass, when all the people had completely crossed over, that the ark of the Lord and the priests crossed over in the presence of the people. Look at somebody and say, neighbor, remember when you cross over. Remember when you cross over. Let me speak from the subtopic of I've got a testimony. Remember when you cross over. We are at a point right now. This is not a typical sermon that you would do before Christmas. But we understand it all fits together in the plan. And so as we look at this, we all are at a point right now. About 12 more days, we're going to be going into the new year. God, I would be remiss to say, that he has taken you through some things this year. And so you ought to be glad that you can stand at this point and realize that you're about to go over. And so we understand that you may go through some things in life. We all have been through some unexpected things throughout this year. But if you can just look back and understand that even though it didn't feel good, God took you through it for a reason. And so as you look through, you've lost some people across this year unexpectedly. You've gone through some hell in your life. You've gone through hot water. You've gone through fire. And as God promised Isaiah said, even though you go through the water, you would not be overtaken. He said, even when you go through the fire, you would not be burned. So I understand. I serve a God that even in the midst of my trouble, he can cover me in the midst of it all. And so I thank God that all of the stuff I been through, I can look back and say, yeah, I'm glad that I went through it because it just made me better. Somebody, if you can believe and agree with me on today, the stuff that you've been through, all the hell that you had to go through, all the people you had to deal with, it just made you better on today. All of the trouble that came up in your life, it was making you better. God was just preparing you for this point right now, that when you go over, he said, I don't want you to forget when you've been through it. See, that's the problem with some of us. We forget what God has taken us through. And so, if you ever forget what God has brought you from, and it's dangerous when you forget where he brought you from, because God takes you through some stuff so you can learn how to handle what it is that he wants to bless you with. And so remember when you cross over. See, there's a thing called short-term memory. Short-term memory is also called primary or active memory. And all this is just stuff that you put in your memory. It's about maybe anything that happens from 30 seconds to several days. This is just what short-term memory is. But then there's some people who suffer from short-term memory loss. That's when you forget what has happened or what you've seen, what you heard, what something that's been done directly to you. It's danger when you have short-term memory loss. Because then you don't remember what has been done to you or what's been done for you. And so I tell you, you don't need to have short-term memory loss when it comes to Jesus. Because sometimes he takes you through some things. So it is that when you turn and look back, that you can remember where he brought you from. And so this first point is you have to remember where you came from. So remember where you came from. You have not been driving that car all of your life. You have not been living in a 3-bedroom house all of your life, or a 4-bedroom house. You haven't had the privilege of having 2 bathrooms all of your life. You can remember when you had to go to a shack outside. You can remember when you could probably see the holes through the floor. You can remember sometimes when some possums came up in your house. You can remember when you could hear some chickens out back clucking and roostering in the morning. You can remember what God has brought you from. And so as you begin to look back, you ought to be thankful for where you are now, because God has brought you from a mighty long way. So you had to go through some stuff to get to it, but God has brought you from a mighty long way. Yeah, there may be somebody who in the midst of active addiction at some point, somebody who was struggling with some issues at one point. Sometimes you didn't even know if you were going to have enough money to pay your bills. Sometimes you didn't even have enough food on your table. You had to put some bologna sandwiches and say, oh, I'm good with that. Sometimes you had to put some grilled cheese in a pan and say, I'm good with that. And say, God, do it, make it enough for me. Sometimes you had to spend some food and have enough for your kids, and so you couldn't even eat that night. But as you look back, you ought to be thankful what God has brought you to now. So it's dangerous when you forget where you came from. So here we are, we're looking at the children of Israel. As they have began to travel through the wilderness, it says that if you go back, I'm not going to go back through it with you, but if you look at Exodus, the Bible begins to declare, back in Exodus 12, it says that as Moses was preparing, God was preparing Moses. He said, begin to tell my people this. He said, begin to prepare yourself. And on the 10th day, you need to get your lamb. Get your Passover lamb. He said, because I'm going to deliver you from under Pharaoh's control. Yeah. He said, but then I want you to do this. I want you to take the youngest lamb, and then I want you to spread the blood over the doorpost. Yeah. He said, and then those who don't have the blood on their doorpost, he said, then the first male child is going to be killed. Yeah. Sometimes God has to take you through some stuff so that you can appreciate what you have now. And so here they are in Israel. In Egypt, these people are being taken through some things. They're under the rule of Pharaoh, being oppressed. And sometimes you may not remember that you've been through this kind of stuff, but 430 years the Bible declares that they were in Egypt under Pharaoh's control. And so God said, he gave Moses the same message. He said, go tell Pharaoh, let my people go. He said, Pharaoh had told him every time, I'm not going to let your people go. And so then God sent this final plague. And that's when the people were released. And this is how I understand how God works. God said, look, he said, you're not going to even have time for the bread to rise, so take you some unleavened bread. Yeah. He said, gird yourself, put your sandals on. He said, because then you're going to have to move quickly. So sometimes the stuff that you go through, sometimes the storms in your life, when God begins to work, he may not deliver you when you want him to. But sometimes he moves so quickly that the devil don't even have time to react. And so God said, listen here, go ahead and put your sandals on. And these people, it said that Pharaoh said, go ahead, you and your people go ahead and get out of here, because this thing that you've allowed to come in my land, he said, go ahead and get out of here. And said, so they scrapped that stuff on. And God calls it Exodus, and then he calls them to cross the Red Sea. God sometimes will allow for your enemies to be defeated when you depend on him. The people who thought they had you down, the people who thought they had you oppressed, when God begins to move, they got to release you. See, people thought they had a hand on you, but when God moves, they have to release, they have to let you go. Your enemies have to flee when God releases you. And so here it is, they said that the children of Israel, after 430 long years, it said that they were released from Egypt. And so not only did they do this, they crossed the Red Sea, they defeated the enemies along the way, but how many know even in this, that the children of Israel still went obedient throughout the way? Sometimes along the way, even when God has done some stuff for you, we had a tendency to be hard-headed on today. We had a tendency to be disobedient. And so as they wondered, God said, listen here, I'm going to let you do this. He said, look, I'm going to allow for you to have some quail. He said, but then they murmured, and then they still were disobedient to Moses. So God said, look, I'm going to allow for you to, even at Kadesh, when Moses got upset and struck the rock, it said that God said, look, I'm tired of these people. He said, I'd kill every one of you. Because the people kept saying, we had this in Egypt. We had vineyards. We had houses, and we had places to stay. We had food to eat. Why didn't we just have died in Egypt? And God said, I'll tell you what. He said, I could have kept you there, but I blessed you. I allowed for you to be released. But I allowed for you to wander in the wilderness for 40 long years. And all the people who here now are going to die out. And then I'm going to raise up a more obedient people. The ones who are going to follow me. Sometimes God will let you go through some stuff when you forget where you came from. Sometimes God will allow for you to bump your head when you forget where you greatness from God. It said when he came back down, Aaron was worshiping idol gods from the people. And even in this, it said Moses got so mad he broke the tablets himself. Moses got so mad at Kadesh that he struck the rock instead of doing what God commanded him to do, was to lift the rock, the rod. And so he struck it instead, and water began to flow. And so Moses, even then, God said, look, I'm going to allow for you to look over, but you won't cross into the promised land. You got to be careful sometimes to be disobedient to God, because sometimes God will humble you in a way that you never been humbled before. So here we are at the end of Deuteronomy. It said that as Moses goes up to the mountain, he looks over, he sees the promised land. And God begins to tell him, this is what I promised you, Moses. He said, but as I promised you, you're not going to be able to enter. And so as he died, when he died, he had already inaugurated Joshua as the leader of the people. As Joshua begins to come in, it's easy sometimes to forget where we come from. It's easy to forget that earlier this year we were celebrating some services and programs over Zoom. Musician appreciation over Zoom. It's easy to forget that last year that we didn't have we were uncertain because there was no vaccine. But then God came through. It's easy to forget that last March when the coronavirus first came, that there was a rush to get some food and some supplies. It's easy to forget where you come from. So now that we got a little bit better now, we forget to thank God for where he's brought us from. So sometimes even when God delivers you, you can't forget to say thank you. And so God will bring us sometimes to a point where we'll think that we got us to that point. They put a little money in our pocket, we forget where we come from. When they give us a shelter, we forget where we come from. Bless us with some car, we forget where we come from. But it's dangerous forgetting where you come from. The second point is, remember how God delivered you. So as they get here to Jordan, say these people had wandered in the wilderness for 40 long years. Should not have taken them that long, but it took them 40 years to get to this point. And say, so as they get to this point, God had already promised, he had already promised the children of Israel that they were going to get a promised land. He just didn't tell them how long it was going to take for them to get there. Sometimes God will promise you some things, but he don't tell you what all you got to go through to get to it. Sometimes he'll promise you some things, but he'll tell you the hell that you got to go through to get it. And so as he takes them through this, they're going through adversity, they're going through some things. It says, so now that they're here, they have reached a turning point. This is after Moses has died. Very back in chapter 1, Joshua, God began to explain, Moses, my servant, is dead. He said, now therefore arise, go over this Jordan, you and all these people, to the land that I am giving you, and give it to them, the children of Israel. Sometimes God got to remove some people out of the way, so that you can get what he has promised you for you to have. Sometimes God got to move some folks out of the way. Sometimes he got to get you away from that job, get you away from those people, get you away from those things, so he can bless you what he wants you to have. Sometimes he got to move you from some environments for you to be able to achieve what he needs for you to achieve. You've been crying over some things that God has been trying to move you away from. You've been crying because some people have died. You've been crying because you lost some things, but God was just trying to prepare you for this next phase of your life. God is trying to prepare you for when you cross over. He don't need you to have the baggage attached to you. So you've been crying over some things. You've been worried about some things, but God was just removing some stuff. He was just cutting off some baggage so you can have what he needs you to have. And so God said, go ahead and prepare yourself. He said, now that some folks have died out, now that Moses has died, now that all the generation has died, and now I got some new people, some faithful people, I can make you cross over. So here it is that the children of Israel, they're marching, they're going, they're walking. And as they begin to walk to the Jordan, it says that they begin to get here to the impassable point. The Bible declares that it is springtime at this time. It's in the middle of spring. And so the Jordan at this time would have been overflowing. The Bible, maybe at this time, according to research, it would have been about March or April. At this time, it said the Bible just declares that it was harvest season. Understand this, when it's harvest season, that means that God is getting ready to do something for you. God is getting ready for a life for you to prosper. And so at the harvest season is when God is going to allow for them to pass over. So here it is during the seasons of your life sometimes. Some things seem impassable. Some things seem impossible. Maybe you have lost somebody. It's in the middle of a pandemic. You have had some sickness. You've had some pain. You've had some financial problems. It seems that it's been impassable in your life, but God has brought you to a point where he can get the glory. God is bringing you to a point where he can get the glory for what you're going to achieve. God is bringing you to a point where you can begin to thank him for everything that he's done for you. That if you remember that he began to deliver you before, and if he's done it before, he can do it again. And so God has brought them to a point where he wanted them to know that I'm going to be the one that performs this miracle. And so he wanted them to get to a point where his presence could crawl. And so as they get to this point, he said, go ahead. Joshua said, look, take the Ark of the Covenant. And when the Ark of the Covenant goes before the people, the Ark of the Covenant just contains the tablet and some of the more holy things that he has blessed them with. And that just symbolizes God's presence. And as his presence goes before them, God said, look, I'm allowing for something to happen for you. And so all Joshua needed the people to do, all God needed the priests to do was just to take a step of faith. He needed them to take a step of faith. God needs you in this season not to worry about what it is that you're looking at, but he needs you to take a step of faith. He needs you to step out on faith. And he understands what the obstacle is in front of you, but he needs you to step out on faith. Somebody has been worried about what it looks like instead of who is in front of you. You've been worried about what's in front of you instead of God being before you. And if you begin to believe that if God is before me, then he can begin to stop some stuff. If you believe that when God goes before you, that the enemy has to flee. When God steps in front of you, some things got to stop. The water has to stop. The fire has to stop. The hell has to stop when God steps in front of you. Yes, sir. So when he steps out on faith, the Bible declares that immediately that the water that was flowing began to stop. Watch this. The Ark of the Covenant went before them. And so sometimes God's presence got to go before you in order for some miracles to happen. The reason why God hasn't come through for you is because you've been trying to go in front of God. You've been treating God like a co-pilot instead of the pilot. And so you got to believe that when God steps in front of you, some stuff got to cease. You've been trying to handle it on your own. But all you got to do is turn it over to God. And just leave it there. You've been trying to handle those people at your job. Just hand them over to God and leave it there. Somebody just say, leave it on today. When you hand it over to God, some stuff got to happen when you just leave it. And so as they begin to step over, they stand there in the midst of the Jordan River. I want to tell you something about Jordan. And this is why it seemed impassable. It was 20 miles long, 2 miles wide, and the water would have been at this time around 120 feet high. That would begin to tell me that it was impassable. Some people can't even swim in 3 feet. You get scared when you see a little kiddie pool. And so when you see this 120 feet in front of you, I dare you wouldn't even step into it. These people are looking at something that seems impossible, but the Bible begins to declare that when things seem impossible, with man all things are possible. Through God. 120 feet in front of them. As they begin to look at this, they probably begin to doubt again and say, Lord, why you bring us to this point? And when you know we can't pass over. On the other side was the promised land. On the other side, this is your blessing. On the other side, this is what God has ordained for you to have. But then the devil comes in between this sometimes, this and that. And then when you're on this side, it seems impossible. But God is saying, I'm going to step in front of you. And when you believe that I can handle it, then some things will start to happen. Then some breakthroughs will happen. Deliverance will happen. When you believe that I can do some stuff for you, I can stop the water. I can stop the fire. I can stop the attacks. I can stop the enemy. When you believe that I can step in front of you. So as they hear, they see this 120 foot of water. And they're just standing there. But then, like I said, the priest took a step of faith. The Bible declares that at this point, in verse 16 in chapter 3, it says that up near a place called Adam, city of Adam, now it's called Tel Adam. And so It's about 18 to 20 miles upriver. Yeah. Anybody know upriver means? That means north. And so it's 118 to 20 miles north from Jericho. At the point where they're standing, it would have been 18 to 20 miles upriver. Mm-hmm. And so the place that the water came from was the Sea of Galilee. So here it is pouring down. But God, up at that point, allowed for something to happen. The Bible doesn't tell me what happened, but it just tells me that the water began to heap up at that point. Yeah. But then there was a second point that would have been where the water intersected. That would have been closer to where the children of Israel were. Yeah. And so that was at the point where the water would have terminated into the Dead Sea. The Bible declares a salt sea. And so this, at that point, it was also cut off. Mm-hmm. Watch how God's work. He may be working up in Hattiesburg and also be working here in Greene County. Yeah. He may be working at my house, but he's working at Sister Everett's house. Yeah. He may be working at my house, but he's at the daddy's house. Yeah. But God begins to cut some stuff off. Yes, when it seems impossible, he's already seen it at that point, miles away. Yeah. But then he's also working where you at. Yeah. His presence was in the water, but it was also working 18 miles upstream. Yeah. And then where they were, he had cut that water off too. So he said, yeah, I see that that water can come and block you and drown you. So I'm going to cut it off there. But then it ain't going to allow for you to be overtaken here either. Yeah. God will begin to work some stuff out at multiple points. When it seems impossible, God begins to work it out. Yeah. So God begins to heat the water up north, but then he cut it off down south. God began to heat some stuff up then, but then he cut it off then. Some people say this is impossible, but I tell you it's not impossible because research has shown ever since that point, this has happened several times since then. Yeah. Since the time in the Bible, and then in 1927, the same thing that happened at that time in the Bible happened at the same point in Adam in 1927. What happened in 1927 was that an earthquake happened, and it shook the rocks that overhang. It shook it, and it made it stop up at that point. And so God will begin to do some stuff sometime. You think we got to reinvent the wheel, but God said, if I did it before, then I can do it again. You've been thinking that your problem is impossible for God to handle. But if he can handle my little problem, I begin to believe that he can handle your problem as well. So God said, yeah, I did it over 2,000 years ago. But if I did it before for the world to itch your blood, if I healed the lame and made the blind to see, if I did it back then I can begin to handle your problem right now. So the Bible declares that all the water did was piled up at Adam. I don't need to know what caused it to happen, but I know that it did happen. So I'm just going to believe that in my mind it was God's presence that caused it to happen. So here it is, that as it begins to heap up at that point, it said the people begin to cross over. So this is the west side of Jericho where this happens. And so the Bible declares that as the people, the priests are in the water, that they're standing on dry ground. They're standing on dry ground. So what was once wet, they're standing on dry ground. And it said they stood there until all the people. It said all of Israel crossed over on dry ground. It said then they use another word in there. I don't understand why they use it because in English it's normal for them to use this. It said in all of Israel crossed over on dry ground until the people had crossed completely over the Jordan. And so what the Bible is letting you know is this. So all the people, it wants you to know that everybody crossed over on dry ground. But then it wants you to also know that it would take dry until all the people crossed over. So the Bible declares that the water didn't begin to run again until all the folks had crossed over. God will allow for your problems to cease until he's finished doing the work in you. God will allow for everything to stop until everybody crosses over. So the things that once should have been flowing through this place, God said, I didn't allow for anything to flow. I didn't allow for anybody to be harmed until everybody crossed over. You got to understand how impossible this is. The Bible doesn't declare how long it took for everybody to cross over. But what we do know is about 2 to 3 million people that's crossing over. That does not count the that doesn't count the animals, that don't count the women and children, but 2 to 3 million people it takes to cross over. So can you imagine how many folks it would have taken and how long it would have taken for the people to cross over until and the water to stay dry that long? Did some research, and if you're doing the math correctly, it probably would have taken about 29 days for everybody to completely cross over. Can you imagine during this time how impossible this would have seemed to the people? Can you imagine being the first person in line? Having to watch everybody else cross over? So I would have been scared. I would have been anxious because I would have thought that the water would have returned. That's how we are sometimes. Sometimes we begin to doubt God because you just say, man, this seems impossible. This shouldn't be happening. But God is saying, I understand it may seem impossible to you. In our minds, everything seems impossible. But God said, when I begin to work, I will dry some stuff up. I'll stop some things and make it seem impossible when your enemies are around you. When things that people are getting to attack, God said, the thing that they thought they were going to throw in your way that should have killed you, I'm going to allow for it to be still until they cross over. And so God is saying, even in this, he said everybody cross over, the water remained dry, the ground remained dry until everybody crossed over. So it is your water can't flow. The devil can't attack as long as God blocks it. God is allowing for everything to pool up until it crosses over. But then it's 35:26. Remember to carry your testimony. In chapter 4, Joshua begins to tell the people this. He said, look, set up 12 stones in the midst of Jordan. He said, this is where the feet of the priests are. He said, set it up there. He said, I want you to set it there as a memorial, as a covenant. And it's in the Bible because it's still there to this day. But then something happened later on. He said, take some stones from the Jordan. Carry it to the camp that was staying there. And as they began to carry it, when everyone crossed over, the Bible declares that they carried these same stones to Gilgal. Why they carried Gilgal? Gilgal was a part of the promised land. This is the first place that they were going to allow for that they were going to step in before begin the conquering some land. So God said this. I imagine he told one person from each tribe, one of the elders from each tribe, he said, carry a stone. All he was telling them was to carry your testimony. God has carried you through some stuff. God has allowed for you to cross over, but you got to carry your testimony. You got to let somebody else know about the goodness of God. That's right. When supposed to look back and say, how did you make it? You say, I don't know how I made it, but I know who allowed for me to make it through. You got to be able to carry your testimony. I imagine that every stone that was carried looked different. No stone was the same. So my testimony is different than my daddy's testimony. My testimony is different than Deacon Bishop's testimony. Your stone can be anything in life. Your stone can be work. It can be school. It can be deliverance. It can be marriage. It can be remembering somebody who died. My stone may not be the same as your stone, but all you got to do is carry your stone. So God is saying this, in the midst of your season, I'm going to allow for you to go through some stuff, and when I get done, when I'm done cultivating you, when I'm done carrying you over, when I allow for you to cross over, carry well, go ahead and tell people about the goodness of God. Tell some folks about the God that delivered you. As you look back over your life, you can say, I can look back and I wasn't good back then, but I can look back and say I'm better. And as you look at this one, when you look back and when God allows for you to cross over to 2022, you can say, I went through some stuff, I went through some hell, but God has allowed for me to be better. I understand that my 2021 didn't look like 2020, and I'm glad for that. Yeah, we ain't coming yet, but I'm still worshiping the Lord. Yeah, we went through some things, you may have got sick along the way, but I'm better. If you look back and somebody said, this is my season for grace, this is my season for favor, God is saying, if you look back over your life, God has brought you from a mighty long way. Songwriter declared that he brought me from a mighty long way. So as you begin to look back, when you cross over, you got to carry your testimony. Yes, sir. So the Bible declares that when the Ark of the Covenant, when the priests, as they carried this ark, when they crossed over themselves, said immediately that the water returned as it was. So when God is finished working on you, some stuff gonna begin to happen in your life.
Yes, sir.
But you still gotta remember your testimony.
Yes, sir.
The waters may return, the flood may come, the hell raisers may get on your trail, but you gotta still remember where God has brought you from.
Yes, sir.
This is why God was telling them to retrieve the stone. This is why Joshua was telling them to retrieve the stone, because he understood that the water was going to return to where it was.
Yes.
So he said, why it's dry, you need to go ahead and carry it. Because if you try to go back into the middle, God, some stuff is going to happen to you. The water may overtake you. If you try to go back to where you were, some stuff is going to kill you. If you try to go back to where you were, the devil's going to destroy you. But God is saying, in the midst of it, just go ahead and carry a stone.
Yeah.
Because if you try to go back,
Yes, sir.
it's danger when you go back.
Yes, sir.
When Lot's wife looked back, she was turned into a pillar of salt.
Yes,
When you
sir.
try to go back, there's some danger in that.
Yeah.
God couldn't let them go back to the same point, because if they did, they could be killed. So God's saying, you can't go back to the same point, but you got to carry your testimony. And so, why did he tell them to carry the stone? He said, this is what I want you to do. He said, this is what I want you to do. He said, this is going to be a memorial.
Yeah.
He said, for the people, so the other folks, you can tell them this, that this is what happened when all of the people crossed over completely on dry ground.
Yeah.
God is saying, when you look back, you can look at your testimony and say, yeah, at that point I remember that I was laying on the hospital in the hospital bed.
Yeah.
I can remember at this point that I may have been on the brink of death.
Yeah.
I can remember at that point that's when my car broke down and I was at the end of my thread. I can remember at that point that's when I almost lost my mind. I remember at that point I almost killed myself. But as I look back, I'm better than what I used to be. I can remember at that point that God brought me through something. God brought me to the place I am now.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So as they put it in Gilgal, the Bible declares this, that the children of Israel completely crossed over on the 10th day of the first month.
Yeah.
It's a significance in that, because the Bible begins to tell you this for a reason. If you look back in Exodus 12, that would have been 40 years to the date that they were released. Y'all don't get that.
Yeah.
That would have been 40 years from the date that they were released from Egypt. So God is saying that was 40 years from the day that they were told to prepare to be released from Egypt. So at this point, you got to prepare for what God is trying to take you to. God is saying, I will tell you at that point to be prepared to be released. But 40 years later, it looks much better, because now you're on the other side. You were oppressed back then, but now you're in a new land. You were oppressed back then, but now you're in the land. You're closer to where I have promised you. You're closer to where I promised that you were going to be in a land flowing with milk and honey. At this point, at 40 years ago, you didn't understand what I was talking about. But as you look back now, when God began to promise you some stuff way back when you were 20, you didn't understand what he was talking about. But now that you're 60 years old, you understand it much better. You can understand that you look back, you may have been 10 years ago, you didn't understand what God was trying to do. But at this point, when you ain't putting a bar up to your mind, at this point when you can think more clearly, when you're not smoking, when you're not doing drugs, when you're not doing stuff, now that you understand better, you can say, Lord, I thank you for where you brought me from. Somebody just say, Lord, I thank you for where you brought me from. So at that point, they're crossing the Jordan. And this thing is just a new period for the children of Israel.
Yes, sir.
So the Bible declares in chapter 5, after they crossed over, it says, so they begin to create a covenant with God. Sometimes you got to create a covenant with God. You got to make a vow to him that you're not going to go back to doing the same thing.
Yeah.
So the males that were born in the wilderness, it said they were circumcised in the 5th chapter. Then they celebrated the Passover, which was on the 14th day.
Yeah.
Not only that, it said that the manna that was falling for him, it said it ceased at that point, because now at that point they could be blessed with some food in that new land. Aren't you glad that God has taken you to a point?
Yes,
the old stuff that you were living on, you ain't got to live on it no more. Aren't you glad that the old money you have, God was taking you to a point where he was going to bless you with more? He said, at this point, I'm taking you to a land that's flowing with milk and honey.
Yeah.
And you don't have to live off the old stuff that you were living on before. But I'm taking you to a place where you can begin to be blessed in this season. Aren't you glad that God can take you to a point where you can be blessed in this season? You can tell your children, yeah, I had it hard, but I had it hard so you can have it easy. I had it hard so that you can be blessed. I went through some hell in my life, but now at this point, as I'm looking back over my life, begins to declare in verse number 22 in chapter 4. Yes. He said, then you shall let your children know, saying, Israel crossed over this Jordan on dry land. Yeah. But then verse number 24 begins to give me some assurance, because this is what Joshua was saying. Joshua said that all the people of the earth may know the hand of the Lord that is mighty, that you may fear the Lord your God forever. So he wanted the people to know. He said, don't just tell your children, but I want everybody else to know this, that you tell the God in Israel. Yes, sir. You shall serve the one true God, the one who will never fail. Yes, sir. He said, I want you to know today, as you cross over, that you serve the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Yes, sir. You serve a God who delivered you from Pharaoh's control. You serve a God who allowed for the Red Sea to be parted. Yes, sir. He said, you serve a God that brought you over 120 feet of water. Yes, sir. Aren't you glad that even throughout this year you've been through some hell in your life? Yes, sir. But as you cross over into the next year, you can be thankful for when God has brought you from. Yes. I understand you lost mother along the way. Somebody may have lost your sister and your brother. But God is saying you ought to be glad on today, because I'm about to bless you in this next season. God is allowing you to go through some things. Yes, somebody has died, but God has brought you to this point for you to be able to know that he has all power in his hand. Aren't you glad on today? Look at your neighbor and say, neighbor, when you carry your stone, just leave it where you are. Somebody say, when you carry your stone, just leave it in this season. Yeah, you're going through some things, believe it. You lost some things, believe it. You lost some family, believe it. You lost some financial things, believe it in this season. Yes, I've gone through hell in my life, but I can leave it in this season. I'm looking back over my life, and I'm looking retrospect, and look what's better now. Oh, yes, the problem was overtaking me in the middle of that season, but at the point I'm in now, somebody begin to thank God on today for blessing you in this season. Somebody thank God right now for all the hell you went through. Somebody thank God right now because he made you uncomfortable in the last season. But at this point right now, I begin to say he can begin to deliver me. Yeah, he brought Israel from a mighty long way. And you begin to look back, God was blessing you. The stuff that you thought was overtaking you, God was just blessing you. The stuff that you thought was designed to kill you, God was just blessing you. The stuff that you thought that was over with, God was just blessing you. God said, I need you to stay there a little bit so you can appreciate what I'm taking you to. The stuff that you've been waiting for, just claim it on today. The thing that God told you he's going to bless you with, just wait a little bit longer. It's going to come through for you. How do you know it's coming through for you? Over 2,000 years ago, he said it's not Jesus. Through 42 generations, just a saving rich like me. How do you know he was doing something for you? When he hung his head, and then he died. Well, when Isaiah promised me that was Messiah was coming, well, I know I got a life gift of a tree of life through Christ Jesus. I'm glad on today that when I look back over my life, the stuff I went through, all the hell I went through, all the folks who criticized me, all the stuff I had to go through, he was preparing me. Somebody said, prepare you for greater. Aren't you glad on today? I'm glad on today that God can deliver me. Aren't you glad on today that God will deliver you? God will see you through. When the devil thought it was over, when the devil thought he had you down for the power, God had his hand on you. And God said, just stay there a little while longer. I'm just preparing you. How you know God is preparing you? When he went down to the tomb, Jesus stayed there that first day. He stayed there the second day. But anybody know that early on that third day morning, he got up with all power in his hand. You got to remember, when God allows for you to cross over, look at your neighbor and say, remember, when you cross over. Some folks forget when you cross over. You forget where you come from. Somebody forgets that when God took you through a test, he just take you through so that you can have a testimony. You thought somebody died in vain. You thought you lost stuff in vain. But God was just preparing you is preparing you for the next season of your life. COVID is inconvenient, but I thank God for it. Because you learn how to operate different. God had to take some stuff away from you. So that you can remember how good it is to praise in church. He had to allow for you to sit in front of a computer or cell phone sometimes for a little while just so you can begin to be faithful and praise Him a little bit better when you came back to the building. God is saying, in this season, I'm just preparing you. And without my presence, you would be lost in sin. But when God allows for you to come out of your situation, you got to prepare something for Him. Set up a memorial. Carry your testimony. Because here's the thing about a testimony. Somebody else is depending on your testimony to make it through. So He's saying this. You want the first one who went through? You definitely won't be the last. The danger is this. When you destroy the memorials, you forget the past. You can't teach future generation about something that's not there. And so God is saying, just tell it everywhere you go. Tell them about a Savior. One who died upon the cross. Born in the manger. And folks come all around just to see Him. Herod tried to kill Him. He said, but tell them about a Savior. One, when Adam sinned, one who chose Israel, but when Israel sinned, God said, I can create a people who are mightier than you, but I still got my hands on you. So I ain't going to destroy you yet, but I'm allowing for you to go through this, just so that you can be better. God had to allow for them to go through the wilderness just to make them better. God had to allow for them to go through the wilderness so that they can be prepared when they went to the promised land. So God needs some folks who are going to truly be on His side. God needs you to be prepared in this next season of your life. I would be remiss to think that God is going to allow for you to go through. And the stuff that you're going through just for you to sit there and be quiet. In this next season, you got to remember when God brings you over. We're standing on today.